What do all four of these controllers have in common? The Radio Masters, the Jumper, and the FreeSky have something in common, but not this TBS Tango 2. The answer is that all of these guys run the EdgeTX operating system. And in fact, most RC controllers used by people in the FPV world run the EdgeTX operating system, or its cousin, OpenTX. And that means that if you're in the RC world long enough, you'll eventually need to update your EdgeTX firmware, flash EdgeTX to a radio that isn't currently running it, or back up or restore your models and settings to or from a radio running EdgeTX. That's going to be the topic of this video. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. I know a lot of the people who watch my videos are new to the world of FPV, so we're going to start this video with a brief discussion of what is EdgeTX. And if you feel like you already know that and you just want to get to the nitty-gritty, down in the timeline below the video there are chapter markers. Down in the video description there's a list of chapters, and you can just skip ahead to the chapter that interests you the most. And I think the best way to explain what EdgeTX is to say that EdgeTX is an operating system for your radio, kind of like Microsoft Windows is an operating system for your PC, or Mac OS, OS X, whatever you run. In the same way that you can buy a Windows PC, and the Windows PC may have different hardware. It may have a better graphics card, it may have a bigger hard drive or more memory, but it's still running Windows, and when you sit down in front of it, if you're familiar with Windows, probably you'll be able to sort of make it do what you want it to do. And that's true for all of these different radios that we saw at the, oh, not that one. The TBS Tango 2 and the TBS Mambo don't actually run EdgeTX. We'll talk about that a little later. But all of these other radios, they all can run EdgeTX or its cousin, OpenTX. And that's great because it means that manufacturers don't have to do the hard work of making the operating system from scratch and doing maybe a bad job of it, or maybe just doing an inconsistent job of it. If you know how to configure a Spectrum radio and then you pick up a Futaba radio, you probably won't know how to do even the most basic stuff because the menu and the interface is completely different. But all of these radios have more or less the exact same functions. Some of them have bigger screens and some of them have smaller screens, so the screens don't always look exactly the same, but the basic functions are there, and a person who knows how to work with EdgeTX on one radio can usually figure out how to do what they need to do in EdgeTX on another radio. What is the difference then between EdgeTX and OpenTX? Well, first let's start with what they have in common. Both of them are open source and free to use. They're developed by people in their spare time and anyone can contribute, although there's a core group of developers who do most of the heavy lifting. OpenTX came first. And my personal take on the history, this is not the official canon, but my personal take is that for whatever reason, there was a long period where OpenTX kind of stagnated. And if you actually look at the release schedule for OpenTX, you can see some big gaps in here where there wasn't a lot going on. And then EdgeTX sort of picked up the ball. That's a kind of a thing that happens with open source projects. If one is stagnating, somebody else can do what's called forking the project. They start a new project based on it, and they continue to expand it and extend it. And that's what EdgeTX is. In my personal opinion, EdgeTX is where you want to be today. EdgeTX is where most of the new development is going on. Some of the features being developed in EdgeTX do get rolled back into OpenTX, and OpenTX does sometimes come up with original features of its own, which, by the way, they cross-pollinate. But EdgeTX seems to be where most of the development's going on, and it just seems to be what manufacturers are moving to. So if you have a radio with OpenTX on it, you're going to want to follow this tutorial to flash it to EdgeTX. And if you have a radio with an older version of EdgeTX on it, you can use this tutorial to flash it to the latest. The next thing we're going to do is not flash the radio, but we're going to back our radio up. Anytime you go to flash your radio, you should back it up in case anything goes wrong in the flashing. It's just a good protocol. And in order to back it up, we're going to download EdgeTX Companion. No, I screwed up. EdgeTX Companion is only if you already have EdgeTX on your radio. If you have OpenTX on your radio and you are switching to EdgeTX, you need to download OpenTX Companion. OpenTX Companion works with OpenTX. EdgeTX Companion works with EdgeTX, and you can tell which one is which by the splash screen that shows up on your radio when you first power it up. I'm going to keep working with EdgeTX Companion because the radio that I have has EdgeTX on it. The steps are literally identical in almost every way I can think of if you're using OpenTX Companion. So I'm not going to re-record this whole video using OpenTX Companion. Okay, EdgeTX Companion is a PC app that runs on Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, and it can be used to back up and restore your configuration. It does other things too, but that's what we're going to use it for here. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to download and install EdgeTX Companion. Now EdgeTX Companion is installed and running, and the next thing I'm going to do is power up my radio. I'm going to plug USB into the top of the radio, and when I do that, the radio is going to ask me what mode I want it to operate in, and I'm going to choose USB Storage SD. After I do that, two new removable drives will pop up in my computer. One of them has two files named firmware.bin and firmware.txt. Do not mess with those. That's your actual radio firmware. Simply close that window. The other one is the SD card that's inside the radio, and that contains all the information that we're going to be backing up. Next, I'm going to go in EdgeTX Companion and hit Read Write and read models and settings from radio. The you say? Oh, because it's 2.7. Mother. It's a bug because my radio is running EdgeTX 2.7, and this is Companion 2.8, and apparently it is not happily backwards compatible. Isn't that something? To find out what version of EdgeTX is on your radio, we're going to unplug USB, and then we're going to, in this radio, we're going to long press the sys key, and then we are going to page to version, and it shows the version number right here, 271 EdgeTX. If you've got a radio with a smaller screen like the Zorro, the process is the same. I'm going to long press the sys key, and then I'm going to page to version, and once again, I can see the version number here is 260. All right, well, here I am on the EdgeTX releases page. I'll link that down in the video description, of course. And if I scroll back, let's look for tags. 272 is the last release that 272, no, 271. That's the version that I've got, 271. Yay. So if I go there, can I find EdgeTX Companion 271? That's the one that I need to get to back up my configuration, apparently. Fine. And if I wanted 2.6, can I get that? 260. Is there a companion version for that? Maybe the backwards compatibility will work for this one. There is a companion version for 260 as well. Let's run 2.7. And once again, we'll plug in the radio and we will go to USB Storage SD. Wait for those removable drives to appear and read models and settings from radio. And this is what I expected to see. Just the models that I actually have on my radio. When I did the same thing with Companion version 2.80, I had a whole bunch of extra stuff here that I knew wasn't right, and I just backed away slowly. So the next thing I'm going to do then is click File, Save As, and I'm going to save this to a folder or a file on my hard drive somewhere where I will find it again. And that is my backup of all the models and settings in my radio. The next thing you need to do is back up your SD card contents, and you're simply going to copy all of the files off your SD card to a folder on your hard drive. And there's two reasons you're going to want to do this. Number one, if you have any customizations, like if you've got a custom sound pack, like for example, there's a Joshua Bardwell sound pack with my voice on it. If you've got any customizations like that, like any custom model images or any other changes you've made to the SD card, you're going to want to save those and you're going to manually copy them back to the SD card after you do the update. There's another reason to back up your SD card that I learned about just before releasing this video, and I'm going to do my best to explain it to you now. And the advantage of this is that it allows you to completely bypass OpenTX Companion. If you don't have a computer, or if you just are kind of annoyed with OpenTX Companion and find it really clunky and cumbersome to use, then this is for you. In EdgeTX 2.5, the developers switched to storing all of the radio data on the SD card. Before EdgeTX 2.5, there was some of the data that was saved in the radio in a separate piece of memory called EEPROM. And the only way to fully back all that stuff up was to use OpenTX or EdgeTX Companion, read models and settings, and then write models and settings. In EdgeTX 2.5, they switched to storing all of that data on the SD card, which means that if you have EdgeTX 2.5 or newer, then you can completely back up your models and settings simply by copying the SD card contents. That's it. However, if you have OpenTX or EdgeTX prior to EdgeTX 2.5, and if you have a black and white screen radio like the Jumper T-Lite that you see here or the Radiomaster Zorro, you have to manually copy the EEPROM to the SD card before you copy the SD card contents. And then after restoring the SD card contents, you have to manually reload the EEPROM. Again, this only applies if you have an older version of EdgeTX or OpenTX. Once you have flashed to EdgeTX 2.8, which is what we're doing today, you can simply back up your radio by copying the SD card contents. That's it. Now, if you need to know how to back up and restore your EEPROM, I'm going to put a link to this video that you're looking at now down in the video description. This is from StyleSucks, and I believe they're an EdgeTX dev. My hope is that you will not have to do this more than one time, if ever, because as soon as you flash to EdgeTX 2.8, which is what we're doing in this video, your EEPROM is not used anymore, and simply copying the radio and model folders off your SD card will be how you could choose to back up your SD card, your whole radio settings and models. However, if you do need to back up and restore your EEPROM for some reason, this is how to do it. There's a link down in the video description. I'd also like to say, I personally find EdgeTX Companion to be the easiest way to do this. Inside EdgeTX Companion, you can manipulate your models, you can modify them. EdgeTX Companion is the only way to convert your models from one radio type to another if you're switching radios. So I just think EdgeTX Companion is something that you should probably get familiar with. But if you just don't want to do that or don't find that to be useful, you can just copy your SD card contents, the radio and model folders, and that will also work. Now that you've backed up your radio, it's safe to upgrade. And the first way I'm going to show you to upgrade is my personal favorite. It is EdgeTX Buddy. It's just a website. It's an app that runs in your browser, so you don't need to download or install anything. It's accessible anywhere you have internet access. The one catch is that it only works, I think it only works in Chrome. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off our radio. When flashing firmware to the radio, the best way to do it is with the radio off, and that will allow you to flash both the firmware and the bootloader at the same time. The distinction between firmware and bootloader isn't super important at this time, but suffice it to say, that's what we want to do if we possibly can. I'm then going to plug in the USB port, and if you have a Radiomaster radio with a charging port on the bottom and a data port on the top, you're going to want to use the data port on the top, not the charging port. Other radios will just have one USB port for both. And I'm going to plug that in. When I plug that in, you can see that the lights on the radio begin to sort of move, but the radio doesn't wake up. It is in bootloader or DFU mode and is now ready to flash. In Windows, we can confirm that this is working correctly by going to Device Manager and then go down to USB Devices and expand it, and you should see STM32 Bootloader there. If you don't see that, you may not have the STM32 drivers installed, although Windows, I believe since Windows 8, it ships with them pre-installed. Windows 10 definitely ships with them pre-installed. And on Mac OS, it also, and I think Linux, although I don't know a lot about Linux, ships with them pre-installed. And the first thing I'm going to do is pick the firmware version that I'm going to flash. I want to flash 2.8.0, which is the latest version at the time that I'm making this. And then I'm going to pick my radio model. It is very, very important that you get the correct radio model. If you flash the wrong firmware, your radio won't work. It won't be damaged. You'll have to reflash it, but it'll be annoying. So for example, look at the FreeSky QX7 and the QX7 Access, the FreeSky X Lite and the X Lite S, the FreeSky X9 Lite and the X9 Lite S. These are easy mistakes to make that you might flash the wrong one. Make absolutely sure you're flashing the right thing. And this is the Radiomaster TX16S, so I'm just going to type TX16S here, and sure enough, here it is. That's what we're going to be flashing. Now at this point, I have two choices. I can flash the radio via USB, or I can download the bin file. If I have any trouble flashing via USB, like my drivers aren't working right, or you just try to do it and it fails, and this is more common than you might think, and a workaround is to download the bin file and flash that locally. But we're going to go ahead and hit flash via USB, and we'll see how it goes. Next, I need to pick available devices, and I'm going to pick the STM32 Bootloader device, which is there because I plug the radio in with the power off. We're going to select that, and we're going to hit Next. and we're going to hit start flashing. Once that completes, the next step is going to be setting up the SD card. We're going to click right there, and it's going to take us to the SD card editor. We're going to unplug USB on the radio, and we're going to power the radio up with USB unplugged. At this point, we may get some error messages related to differences between the old version of EdgeTX and the new version. It's probably okay to just skip those things. The developers have taken care of them. So let's go ahead and follow the steps here. Connect your device to the computer USB, and if prompted, select USB storage. And once that's done, we will select SD card, and here is the USB drive that contains all of my SD card contents. You can see the directories here, firmware, images, etc. That is your SD card in your radio. So we'll just click that and select. Firmware version is 280, radio model is TX16S. Available sounds. Hey, where's the Bardwell sound pack? Get that added. EdgeTX developers. Do it. Do it. Do it. I'll just pick English for now. And apply changes. This is pretty nice. Actually, this is the first time I've seen this. And normally you have to download the whole SD card contents, then manually remove and update and copy, and then copy over the stuff that you changed. And this seems to be doing it automatically. So, well, we'll see how that works. It's going to take for freaking ever because the SD interface, or the USB interface on this radio is slow as frick. So I'll see you back here in maybe even like 10 or 15 minutes. Well, that didn't take as long as I thought. Let's see how it worked. We'll go ahead and unplug USB and see if the radio appears to be happy. What about my scripts? Oh yeah, those are all my normal scripts. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Express LRS, TBS agent. Yeah, everything seems to be where it was. And presumably it updated the things that it needed to update to go from 2.7 to 2.8 without me having to download the entire frickin' new SD card contents. That's really slick. Hopefully that went as smoothly for you as it did for me, and you are good to go with your new version of EdgeTX. Next, I want to look at some of the ways that this can go wrong and what to do about them, as well as a callback to that question I raised about why this doesn't apply to the Tango 2 and the Mambo. But before I do that, I want to just take a second to remind you that the best way to support the content that you're watching right now is via patreon.com. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned it. The amount you subscribe at is totally up to you. Just think about how much value you get out of my content and how much I'm saving you, perhaps in time or maybe buying the wrong products. Pick a number, head on over to my Patreon and sign up at that dollar value. You can stop whenever you want. There's no commitment. You get access to my Discord server where there's helpful people you can chat with, troubleshooting forum, a buy-sell trade forum, a way to meet up with people in your area for FPV, not that kind of meetup. If today's the day that I have earned your support, there's a link in the video description to my Patreon. I'd love to have you as a supporter. And if I haven't earned it yet, that's fine. Keep watching the content. I'll keep making it. I can't stop doing it. Maybe the day will come. And the first thing that might go wrong in this process is, for some reason, you might end up wiping out your models and settings. Sometimes after doing a firmware update, the radio says, bad radio data, and then just wipes all your models and settings and resets itself to factory defaults. If that happens, the way to restore your models from the backup that you definitely made, right, is to plug in USB with the radio powered up, select USB storage. Next, in EdgeTX Companion, click File, Open, and navigate to where you saved that models and settings file that you saved previously that you backed up before you started flashing, and we'll open that file. Following that, you should be able to just hit Read Write and write models and settings to radio. Having done that, if you then unplug your radio from USB, you should see that everything is as it was. Another problem you might run into is that when you plug in the radio with the power off, you might not get that STM32 Bootloader driver appearing in your device manager. Now, this is going to be a Windows-specific solution. This almost always just works on Mac OS and Linux, but in Windows, sometimes the driver gets a little bit messed up. If that does happen, search for Immersion RC Driver Fixer and go to Impulse RC Downloads and go to right here, the Impulse RC Driver Fixer. After downloading that file, power down your radio, plug in the radio with power off, and then run the Impulse RC Driver Fixer. It should search for your flight controller, which is actually your radio, not a flight controller, and say installing DFU driver. And once it's done that, hopefully at that point you should be able to flash the radio as I showed you previously. I want to acknowledge that the EdgeTX Buddy way of flashing EdgeTX is not the only way to do it, and there are alternatives if for some reason that way isn't going to work for you. This is the EdgeTX installation guide, which has the fully manual way of doing it, where you download a file, you put the file onto your SD card of your radio, and then you use the radio itself to flash itself. I'm going to put a link to this in the video description if you need to follow it, but it is so tedious, especially if you've never done it before. It can be really overwhelming, and there are many, many steps where you could make a mistake and have it not work how it needs to work. And the EdgeTX Buddy way of doing it is so much better and easier that I really would like to just steer everybody that direction if at all possible. Now that you've flashed your radio to EdgeTX, you're going to want to get started actually freaking using it. And the good news is that there are tons and tons of tutorials out there for OpenTX. Wait, OpenTX and EdgeTX aren't the same thing. Well, they are similar enough that the things that people will show you how to do in OpenTX can also be done in EdgeTX. It's just sometimes the interface looks a little bit different. And there are more and more tutorials out there using EdgeTX as EdgeTX has gotten more popular, including many tutorials that I myself have put out. In fact, it's probably about time to do like a basic getting started guide with EdgeTX. Well, the closest I ever came to that was the setup guide for my JB Xylo beginner build. I partnered with Lumineer and GetFPV to do a beginner build where you buy a set of parts, you put them together, and then you configure them. And in the process of walking you through setting up that quad, I guess I gave a little bit of an intro to EdgeTX tutorial. So I'm going to put a card on screen linking to that, and if you're looking to get started with EdgeTX, that's a great place to start. I'll also put a link down in the video description. Even if you don't end up buying this starter kit, the basic process of setting it up is very, very similar for all the quadcopters that I've worked with. I'll see you over there.